This is an interesting season for everyone in our churches and across our fellowship, really all over the world. Uh, every country of the world is experiencing challenges. I was on a video call doing devotions with missionaries to the Andes yesterday. They're talking about how in a couple of locations they can only go out for an hour a day, or I'm sorry, an hour a week to buy groceries. The rest of the time they're confined to their home or they could be arrested. So that's even worse than some of us have experienced. And what that does, that puts us all in places of unbelievable stress and trauma and experiences that we've never had before. And so we've got two of our network chaplains here in Don Snyder, who is veteran chaplain, worked in prisons and headed our prison ministry and chaplaincy ministry across this network for many years. And then Josh Czyz, who is a newly appointed network missionary, doing chaplaincy with law enforcement, first responders, and prisons. And we're going to work through some issues and talk about some things and hopefully provide some resource and some help to you. Guys, just very quickly, how does this COVID crisis that we're in relate to what you as chaplains respond to, what you guys do as a calling?
This is a critical incident, so-called, and a critical incident is a time in which people's lives are overwhelmed. Their ability to cope might be less than the need is, and because of that, strange things are happening. It's also a collective critical incident in which we are all experiencing this. The very nature of a pandemic is an epidemic with the pan on the front. Pan means everybody. So we're all in the same frying pan, so to speak, with this thing. And it's got everything from the government offices to the services. And of course, New York State, as it's trying to open, we're slowly moving through some stages. And maybe Josh wants to add a little more to that.
What we do as far as critical incidents, in the sense that we think of critical incidents in a way of, an incident itself that we are responding to as chaplains. There's an event, a traumatic event. It's usually a single event, maybe somewhat prolonged, but I think we dismiss something like this as a critical incident because it is so prolonged, and as Don said, it's also collective, right? It's so many people impacted by it, but it really relates to what we do as far as chaplains and responding to critical incidents, because it's traumatic to many, or it's at least a critical incident to so many, and we're having some of the similar reactions, some of the similar symptoms that people have when they experience a critical incident, when they experience a traumatic event.
So define for us, if you would, a little bit of what a critical incident is and the implications of that, what it means.
Yeah, so it's an event that somebody goes through that's not a normal event, and in the cases of first responders, in some ways it is a normal event for them because they go through a lot of those experiences. But what has been identified is that certain events over time, they build up, and we have certain reactions, and we can't predict what our reactions are. So perhaps an event that a first responder would have gone through at one point would have not been something that would have impacted them significantly. A similar event down the road could, and so we respond to those events and do a particular process, debriefings, defusings, to really look at how they're responding to that event.
So what are the implications there, Don?
Well, the implications are that people are going to be doing things they normally wouldn't do. This is impacting them in a way, and their reaction, even though it seems unusual, is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. It's important to remember that everybody is experiencing something that's unusual, and this is that kind of a thing. Some of the signs and the symptoms may be that Some people may have spiritual difficulty with it. Other people are growing with a greater hunger than ever before. There's a spiritual impact to it that's being evidenced. There's also a physical impact that as people are at home, are homeschooling their children, and are working from their homes or they're laid off, their whole structure of life is changed and is very different. And this causes also emotional stress because people work their way through it, but then they become a little bit more short fused with other people as well.
One of the things that I think of when it comes to this event is you see, whether it's social media or just in conversation, you see the memes about people and trips to the fridge and gaining weight and all that. You see people or hear of people having really dysregulated sleep schedules. I think I've experienced and others probably, like you mentioned, Don, kind of the shorter fuses, or, just kind of a little more irritable. And a lot of that is actually pretty typical of somebody who's gone through critical incidents. And that's exactly the symptomology that we tell you to watch out for, among other things as well.
So guys, how do we deal with it as pastors and as church leaders, not only in ourselves, perhaps in family members or those who we're pastoring? How do we cope?
Well, first of all, recognize that it's normal in this abnormal time. It's something we should anticipate greater difficulty in people getting together and agreeing on things because so much has changed. The other thing is the way people respond to stresses like this oftentimes is something that is unhealthy. Instead of taking the bigger picture and recognizing there are circumstances that we have absolutely no control over. For example, everything being on pause. We want to do things. We're anxious to get out there. But there's really no control over the fact that the public health departments and the governor has put us on pause, and we're still under that social distancing expectation. So we have no control over some things. We struggle, and people will struggle with that. The personal things that happen to people is some people tend to eat more frequently or eat more poorly. Some people tend to look for ways to entertain themselves, such as watching social media to a great degree, which is really not helpful. We need information, but social media just is there. And social media and the media in general are not really very helpful to us in many ways.
Talk to us about the ministry of presence and self-care as far as an aspect of how we're going to care for ourselves and deal with this situation.
Those are two huge elements as far as a response that I think any one of us can take. And you mentioned self-care. It's kind of the picture of the being on an airplane, the oxygen mask come down, and the stewardess, the flight attendants always tell you to put yours on before you worry about somebody else. That's what self-care is, right? That's the picture of self-care. And it's identifying that you need to look at yourself. And so I heard this phrase some time ago, and I think it's a great phrase for self-care, and that's to stop and take stock. Stop and take stock. So that's pausing to look at ourselves and recognizing the need we have to take care of ourselves. And then when we are sure that we're taking care of ourselves, like you said, as pastors, we have responsibilities for other people. And so I think ministry of presence is a key way that we do that. And it's interesting that it's a time where we can't really be physically present with each other. And so we need to find other creative ways. A lot of people are using Zoom and other sorts of creative ways. But I think as pastors recognize that people are struggling, and so to be checking in on them as much as possible.
So how would you say churches should approach ministry during the pandemic? Because obviously things are much different now than they were 3 months ago.
We're going to have to, certain parts of New York State have begun to come off pause. in stages. And the stages are not just a starting point, but the stages are when we begin to transition into doing things in ways that are very safe ways for us to meet together. My own church had its first parking lot service, that the church that I attend had its first parking lot service this past Sunday. And it was well done, and I appreciated it. It was really a stage forward, but the time in which we all gather in the sanctuary, as we've been accustomed to, that is some ways off. So we're dealing with things in stages, and we all need to be patient with each other. I think it's also true that there are no two people who agree on exactly how these stages should be fleshed out and worked out in their situation. So people see different views of that. We need to take care of ourselves moving forward. Of course, as Josh just said, it's so important to get proper rest and try to take care of ourselves with healthy lifestyles.
So all of that being the case, and talking about self-care, how would you guys say the church should approach ministry during the pandemic that we're in?
The first and most important thing, the church needs to be a part of its community. And there are ways to engage with the community now. We've seen people, or churches do a number of things. Sometimes they help with feeding programs. Sometimes they help with distribution programs. I think that some may have possibly offered their sites to be testing sites, and in ways that we can engage with our community. It always warms my heart when I hear of a church that honors either the medical staff or the law enforcement or the fire service folks at this time with a meal or gifts or some little thing or some little bit of respite. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Some of us might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of need. And the very base, the very bottom is physiological needs. And so to recognize that as a church, a lot of times we think of the spiritual, we think about, devotional messages, we think about pouring into people's lives emotionally or spiritually, but recognize that in this time, physical needs are, and safety needs, safety needs is the second one up, and people's safety is compromised right now in this time. And so at least their perception of their safety is compromised. So think of ways as a church that you can begin to meet those needs. And I would just say be proactive and not reactive, right? Don't wait until things open up. Don't wait until we can have services again. Don't wait until people can gather at the church building. We're a couple months into this, and we are weeks out from regular services happening. And so I would encourage our pastors to be proactive and begin to meet those needs now if you're not already doing so. So
what kind of things do you think the church could be doing now that maybe it's not doing yet? What kind of ideas do you guys have as you've engaged with the community?
So I think, I think of things like food pantries. I think of some of the food distribution that I'm seeing some churches already engaged with. I think it's great. Serve as distribution points or find where people are distributing food and other resources and get involved there, right? So begin to be recognized as someone who is a part of the community, who is pouring into the community, being a resource to the community.
A number of our churches are doing that. I know Real Life in the Bronx, Reggie Stutzman, and Hope Day New York, Steve Malazzo in Bethlehem. They've had truckloads of food. I know there's something out in the Western region as well that we're planning on some of the rural compassion assistance coming through to help our churches. What other things are on your mind, Don, that the church might be doing now to engage in reaching the community?
Well, I think some of particularly our parents may need help with their children. And while we have to observe social distancing, I think that retired teachers and some retirees may be able to help tutor children that are struggling with school. Mm-hmm. Not everybody is going to do well schooling at home by distance. In our own community, I know that there isn't necessarily even good broadband out here in places, in rural places in Western New York. And maybe if the church has access to that, that could be helpful. I would like to see our churches become a favored location in communities where people come and we find creative ways to serve them.
Amen. Amen. Obviously, pastors, I've heard some of the guys and gals who have said, you know, we want to go back to normal. Talk to us if you as chaplains think there will ever be a normal.
There's a phrase often used in chaplaincy and certainly in critical incident stress management referred to as the new normal. And I think it's become a more popular phrase, but this really is going to be the case for us. You know, I think in many ways, we're going to have to realize that the normal that we once knew is gone. And in so many ways, at least for a lengthy season, we're going to be in a new normal. And so to understand that we can't as pastors wait till we can begin to restore things to the way they once were. We need to figure out ways that it's going to be a new normal for the future and adapt to that.
Hygiene is something that we're going to be preoccupied with, I think, for a long time going forward. As we think about hygiene, it's more than just keeping the church clean, but it's helping people to be safe and have healthy distancing and somehow serving in other ways. We're challenged today. I think we need to use our telephones a little bit more, and like conference calling may help some people who are not computer savvy. It's still a connection. The connection is the great challenge that we're having to stay connected with our people. And so we're headed toward that new normal that Joshua talked about, and on our way.
Part of that new normal, when we look back, prior to 9/11, we had curtains separating a airplane cabin from the cockpit, and you could see right into the cockpit for the whole flight. That's not permitted anymore. There's new normal. I could remember the days when you could walk people to the boarding gate without having to go through security. You didn't have to have a ticket to go to the gate. You just went to the gate and the people who had tickets got on the plane. So there have been changes through time, and never more easy or more relaxed. Those changes always become more restrictive, more confining, and maybe a little more difficult to deal with. And I think that's really a time that chaplains and pastors are going to be needed to just walk people through some of those new normal changes.
Yes, I would agree. I've watched a few changes during my lifetime, and I think this is probably the most profound and far-reaching one right now, today in my lifetime. I remember very well when, if you flew on an airplane, somebody who smoked maybe was sitting next to you, and they smoked right next to you on the airplane. I'm glad that day is behind me. I was never sorry when that changed, but this is one that is much more difficult, because just being around the spray droplets from people's speaking or singing, or obviously sneezing or coughing, or just maybe exhaling, has a possibility of having contagion with it. So hygiene, again, and social distancing, or I should say personal distancing, is part of the new normal.
I can testify to the fact that you don't have to have that close a proximity. When I was with our national leadership in world missions, we didn't handshake, we fist bumped, we elbow bumped one another. There was a good 3 to 4 feet between us anytime that we were close at all. Of course, nobody knew then, that they were carriers. And when I got back from Missouri, I didn't realize I was a carrier, but there was no major coughing, sneezing, any spreading at all. We were just together in the same room. And the incidental contact is much more casual than I think what people are talking about. There doesn't have to be that close, intimate coughing, sneezing in each other's face kind of thing for there to be transmission. It's very quick and very easy. I want to have you guys talk just a little bit as we wrap it up about self-care, and thinking about the fact that we're in a critical incident stress situation, and the challenges that our pastors are dealing with, the difficulties that our families are dealing with. What are some of the things that you think we can do to take care of ourselves?
Well, it's important to maintain our spiritual tone. We being body, being soul or mind and spirit, we need to take care of all three parts of ourselves. We're preoccupied right now with hygiene with the body, but our mental attitude is very important too. Getting our rest, our prayer life, reading the Word of God, and for the body, caffeine intake is an important thing to watch. Our exercise, our diet, all of those lifestyle things are really important to hold together at this time.
Yeah, I think it's important to pause and take a look at our own needs. I think a lot of times as pastors, we kind of, and chaplains, we push ourselves aside, and we're so accustomed to taking care of others. I think it's important that we really take inventory. And so really look at your sleep patterns. That's one of the things that we do in critical incident stress management is we look at people's sleep patterns. We look at their attitude. We look at their eating and drinking habits. It's and law enforcement and emergency services. We talk about alcohol intake and all those things that are things that you really need to take a look at and recognize what changes have taken place, right? If your family is noticing changes, you may be in denial about those changes, but pay attention to what family members and friends are saying about how you're doing or how you're not doing. And so, I mentioned before the illustration of the airplane oxygen mask, and this is the time to be doing that. This is the time to be pausing, making sure that you are taken care of before you're worrying about taking care of everybody else.
I've shared with many of our pastors and presbyters. I've asked them the question, how many of you have ever said, I wish life would slow down a little bit so that I could have more time at home? And right now, your prayers have been answered.
That's right.
Although maybe not the way you want. But I've encouraged them to make sure that they take advantage of this time.
Yes.
The time for the additional prayer, the time for the additional rest, if they can, the time for reading, the time for self-reflection, the time to hear God say something new to them in order to get them ready for the next stage of whatever that new normal is. Realizing that we're going to have to keep the online presence that everybody has now become accustomed to, in addition to rolling out services with more restrictions and limitations and social distancing and sanitizing needs. It's not going to get easier. There's going to be a greater challenge, and that's going to make it even more challenging to make sure that people take care of themselves.
You're absolutely right, Duane. I do. I think of the fact that a lot of pastors are doing more online than they've ever done before, right? Figuring out online services. They need to recognize that takes a toll. The people talk about Zoom fatigue or screen fatigue that takes place, and I think we don't necessarily account for how significant that is. One of the other things that I think is going on is everybody is doing more meetings, right? Because we can't be going out and connecting with people. We're doing more of this and not recognizing the impact that it has. So pay attention to all those little things that build up, add up, and create issues for ourselves.
This pandemic This pandemic presents a great opportunity for Christian growth and outreach with a backdrop of uncertainty and fear. It's that backdrop that put the 20th century pace of life in timeout, and everybody wants to know the future, but we need to shepherd our way forward. I feel that this is a time of great spiritual awakening. And yesterday I was on a video recording that, or a Zoom meeting, a Zoom training actually, that said that the longer people are away from church, the more will be the impact when they go back to church and gather again. I think it's going to be in stages, so it won't hit all at once, but it's our opportunity to live in this day and this time. Thank you for letting us share.
Well, we're grateful for the ministry of chaplaincy and for the support not only of you two brethren, but our brothers and sisters across this network that are involved in chaplaincy ministry in hospitals and jails, corporate chaplains as well. So grateful for the dedication and the service. And I'm just glad that we can have this time together. We'll be sharing this with our network, and just believe that it'll be a help and a resource and encouragement to them. Thanks, guys. God bless you.
God bless.
Thank you. God bless you.